2:47 p.m., a quiet Tuesday at First National Bank. A man walks in holding a check that could change his life. Minutes later, it's burning at his feet, turned to ash by the very man sworn to serve him. The smell of charred paper fills the air. Phones rise. Laughter spreads. And behind that calm stare, something far greater than humiliation is unfolding. Because what everyone thinks is justice is about to become judgment. Have you ever watched someone destroy their own future without even realizing it? He thought he was proving a point. But what he burned wasn't just paper. It was everything holding his career together. Before that afternoon, David Williams lived a life most would call quiet. A 45-year-old entrepreneur who built his success from nothing. He preferred hoodies over suits, coffee over champagne. To his neighbors, he was just another man who minded his business, who waved to kids on their way to school, who fixed his own car in the driveway on weekends. What no one saw was the weight he carried. The years spent proving he belonged in rooms designed to shut him out. That Tuesday, he wasn't there to make a scene. He was there for business. A routine deposit after months of hard work. Another step toward expanding his company. But inside the marble walls of First National Bank, respect had an unspoken price, and appearances could decide your worth before you said a single word. As David stepped toward the counter, the world still saw just a man in a hoodie. Not the owner. Not the boss. Not the story about to make headlines. He thought this would be another simple transaction. But what waited on the other side of that counter would turn a routine deposit into a public humiliation broadcast of the world. The moment David handed over the check, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations quieted. Eyes lingered longer than they should have. The paper felt heavier in his hands than usual. $2.3 million signed, verified, earned. But to the man behind the counter, Marcus Wellington, it was impossible. His expression twisted, not in confusion, but in disbelief masked his duty. He tilted the check under the fluorescent lights, smirking slightly as though it were a bad joke. Behind him, his assistant, Sarah Mitchell, hesitated, her instincts whispering something wasn't right. Marcus called for verification, his tone sharp enough to draw attention from nearby customers. Within seconds, whispers began to ripple through the room, words like fake, scam, and him, passing from one curious stranger to another. The digital clock on the marble wall blinked 2:47 p.m., counting the seconds as dignity slipped through David's fingers. When Marcus declared loudly that the check was counterfeit, laughter followed. A woman near the loan desk began filming, her phone raised high, capturing what she thought was justice in action. David stood still, every muscle in his body locked in place, not from fear, but from years of knowing exactly what this looked like to them. He tried to speak, to explain, but Marcus didn't want explanations. He wanted performance. He held up the check for the crowd to see, his silver lighter gleaming between his fingers. The spark flashed, paper curled, and before anyone could blink, flames danced across the document that represented David's hard work, trust, and respect. The scent of burning ink and paper filled the room, curling smoke winding up toward the pristine ceiling, as if trying to escape the ugliness below. The check disintegrated at David's feet, its ashes scattered like the remains of a name denied. Phones recorded, comments poured in, laughter swelled. Marcus crushed the ashes under his Italian leather shoe, declaring the problem solved, as if he performed an act of heroism. Even the security guard, unsure of protocol, sided with the noise, urging David to step aside. Sarah's face paled. She could see something in David's calm that no one else could, an authority too still to be ordinary. But no one listened. In that moment, David wasn't a customer. He was a spectacle, stripped of identity and humanity under the harsh light of self-righteousness. The clock blinked again, 2:52 p.m. He had 8 minutes until his board meeting, 8 minutes until the truth would turn the fire back on its maker. As the crowd swelled, so did Marcus's pride. He mocked, lectured, preached about fake checks and protecting honest Americans, unaware that every word, every step, every cruel smirk was being immortalized online. David's calm wasn't surrender. It was a storm gathering patience. His phone buzzed in his pocket, urgent reminders of the meeting that would soon redefine everything. But here, in this moment, surrounded by laughter and ashes, He let the silence speak, because some lessons are only learned when arrogance meets consequence. The bank's marble floor shimmered under the harsh lights, reflecting not just a fire's residue, but a mirror of society's quiet rot. How quickly respect burns when skin color decides credibility. Marcus thought he'd won. He thought he'd exposed the fraud. But the truth was still sitting silently in front of him, watching, waiting, counting down. He thought the humiliation was complete. But what David was about to reveal would burn far hotter than any flame in that bank ever could. The room had fallen into a strange silence, one thick with tension and disbelief. David sat calmly in the leather chair, his posture steady, his eyes sharp. Around him, laughter had quieted, replaced by murmurs that no longer sounded so certain. The scent of burned paper still lingered, clinging to the air like guilt that refused to fade. Marcus Wellington stood proudly near the counter, basking in the glow of his viral moment, unaware that the same cameras capturing his triumph were about to document his downfall. When David finally stood, the movement was slow, deliberate, a quiet shift that drew every gaze in the room. The security guards tensed, ready to react, their hands hovering over their radios. Marcus's smirk faltered, just slightly, as David reached into his jacket. The crowd collectively held its breath. For a split second, every stereotype, every prejudice in that room flashed through their minds, each one expecting resistance, chaos, danger. But David's hand didn't pull out a weapon. It revealed a single white business card. He placed it gently on the counter beside the ashes of his burned check. The silence deepened as Marcus stepped forward, reading the name printed in clean black letters. David Williams, Chairman and CEO. Williams Capital Group. His throat tightened. Sarah gasped audibly. Phone zoomed in. The crowd froze as reality crashed through performance. David's voice remained calm, measured, controlled, but the authority in it left no room for denial. He opened his tablet, revealing the bank's internal board portal, his credentials filling the screen like a verdict. Line by line, the truth unfolded. Majority shareholder, board chairman, controlling owner of the very institution Marcus claimed to protect. The same man he just publicly humiliated owned everything around them. Every desk, every dollar, every inch of marble beneath their feet. The security guards lowered their radios, eyes wide. Sarah's hands trembled as she whispered, "Oh my God." Marcus's face drained of color. His arrogance dissolved, replaced by a creeping, suffocating fear. The crowd began to step back, realizing they weren't witnessing justice. They were witnessing a reckoning. Every word, every insult, every act of prejudice had been broadcast to thousands online, preserved forever. David looked at the ashes again, then back at Marcus. "You didn't just burn a check," he said quietly. "You burned my money." The sentence hit harder than any shout could. The magnitude of the mistake rippled through the air like a shockwave. Marcus stumbled backward, his hand trembling as he reached for words that wouldn't come. The same people who once cheered now turned their cameras toward him, recording the shift in power, the unraveling of a man who mistook bias for authority. The clock on the wall blinked 3 p.m., the exact moment David's board meeting was set to begin. Without raising his voice, without an ounce of anger, he spoke again. "And I believe this branch needs immediate review." The words landed like a gavel. The silence that followed was absolute. Every person in that bank now stood as a witness, not to an act of fraud, but to the consequences of arrogance and the quiet, devastating power of truth. He thought the fire had destroyed a lie, but what it really did was expose the truth that would end his career forever. The lobby that had once echoed with laughter now felt like a courtroom after the verdict. The smell of smoke lingered, faint but unforgettable, a reminder how quickly ignorance can ignite into injustice. Marcus Wellington stood frozen, staring at the man he'd humiliated, his arrogance reduced to silence. David didn't shout, didn't gloat, didn't even look angry. He simply opened a file on his tablet, submitted a formal suspension notice, and handed it to the trembling assistant manager beside him. It was over. But for everyone watching, both in the room and online, it was only the beginning. The video spread faster than any rumor ever could. Millions saw the lighter, the ashes, the moment arrogance met its reckoning. Headlines followed. Bank manager burns check a black business owner, who turns out to be his boss. Comment sections exploded with outrage and reflection. Some called it poetic justice. Others called it a mirror. For David, it wasn't about revenge. It was about exposure. He could rebuild a check, but not a man's decency. As he walked out of the bank, past the same marble floors that moments ago held his ashes, people moved aside, not out of respect, but shame. Sarah whispered an apology that barely reached his ears, but he didn't respond, because it was never just about one branch, one man, or one check. It was about a pattern that stretched far beyond that building. How many others had walked into rooms like this, only to walk out smaller? How many had their worth measured not by their work, but by the color of their skin? The true cost of racism isn't just embarrassment or lost opportunity. It's the slow erosion of trust, of faith and fairness itself. In that quiet aftermath, David knew the viral moment would fade, but the message wouldn't. He made sure of it. The board launched a full investigation into discriminatory practices across every branch under his control. Training policies changed. Leadership shifted. And yet, even as reforms took shape, the lesson cut deeper than any policy could fix. Because no amount of corporate correction could erase the truth that was laid bare that afternoon. That respect in this world often comes with conditions it should never have. David returned to his office, placed a new check on his desk, and stared at it for a long moment before signing it. Then, quietly, he said what millions would later repeat. No one should have owned the bank just to be treated like they belong in it. His words became a headline, then a movement, then a question that still echoes through every act of bias and every moment of silence that follows it. How many more times must dignity burn before the world learns to see beyond skin and status, to see the person first?